My mission as well is to work with President Clinton to remind the American people there's still suffering and work to be done here.
And we spent most of our time talking today about what needs to be done now so that the economic plan and the donor conference to be held at the end of this month has a chance to work.
Well, if the two presidents' mission was to remind Americans that there is still suffering and work to be done, you can't say it was all that successful. A lot of Americans, particularly Haitian Americans, are well aware of the continuing crisis in Haiti. But the subject of the work that needs to be done seems to have dropped out of the headlines for the rest of us. We've got with us in the studio Marie Saint-Cyr. She is the chair of the board of directors of the Lambi Fund for Haiti. We also serve together on the board of Madre. There's a donors conference coming up, hosted by the United Nations. Marie, if you were simply to tell them what you saw in Haiti, you just got back, what would you say?
I would say that I see a country in total shambles. Outside of the borders of Port-au-Prince, there is a town named Léogane where 90% of the town is down. I met with children and mothers in crisis, in continuous crisis. When the flashlights are off and the camera is off, the dust settling on people who live in makeshift tents. It's a horrendous image to look at every day.
And we're talking at the end of March. The hurricane, the first one, happened at the end of January. What's happened?
With the rain coming, there is much urgency. And the leadership, I'm sorry to say, is not there to take on a plan for the 1.2 million displaced.
The Haitian leadership, the world leadership?
The Haitian leadership is not there. And as much as the world leadership is interested in making things better in Haiti, it has to be done within a plan of a nation-building plan.
Take us back to the imminent hurricane season. What will those who have been in makeshift camps all this time suffer? What will they go through as the rains begin to fall?
As you know, with Hurricane Jane a couple of years ago, it's total devastation when the inundation begins. And if we hit with a hurricane, those in the tents cannot survive that kind of inundation. And that's a primary concern. Last year, I went to Gonaïve after the hurricane, and a year later, towns were still recovering from the mudslides and the open rivers, banks that were totally, out of the banks into the towns. And we know how many people died in those hurricanes. I think that we cannot afford to leave 1.2 million people waiting for the hurricane season to come through and see what happened. There is a need for a major transition, building very quickly housing and moving people into the town that exists. After all, Haiti is not just Port-au-Prince. Granted, there's been highly centralized, but the decentralization has to happen where we can build up, whether it's hunger, huge spaces where we can move people into the towns that are functional.
Last time we spoke, we're talking about your family who were there, and you have the advantage and also the burden of having family there and being able to talk to people about their fears, their lives, the crisis that they're going through emotionally, intellectually, mentally. We heard a story not long ago about the mental health crisis in Haiti. Reporters seem to bring us pictures, but we don't hear much of the stories. What did you hear?
I heard tremendously worrisome stories from young people who have no sense of real hope, who feel very scattered. With the school out and all kids are hanging around, I met with a number of children whose schools are broken. There are thousand plus schools that are just totally devastated, and some of them with students who have died and who have not been disinherited, disentered. It's very frightening that those kids have that image and that they have that sense that they're going to go back to school and that is going to be where they're going to be going.
They're going to schools with their dead former colleagues and classmates still interred, buried right there.
Yes, but they have not started school. There is no date for school to start. And so there is a lack of normalcy, a lack of structure. And that, I think, is really infringing on the mental health of those children.
How does it show itself?
It shows itself in worries. When I ask kids, how do you feel? They say, we don't sleep. They tell me about their nightmare. Some mothers tell me about rocking their kids all night long. And so we know that there is a major problem, and we know that there is no mental health infrastructure to respond to it. So that is one concern. Women and children, in particularly, it's close to me. When I look at the women in Haiti who have children on their shoulders, who have children who are hurt in a tent on the floor, it's unbearable.
What are their dreams like?
It's unbearable.
What are their nightmares,
Their dream
perhaps?
is survival, day by day, moment by moment. Getting food, if you see the lines, the long lines of women body to body waiting for food in huge bags, rice beans. But what about the fire to cook it? What about the oil to cook it? And carrying it home on their heads. It's very painful to look at the situation in Haiti right now.
And what about the men?
The men are there. There are no jobs. And we beg for the Donors Conference to consider that we need to revive the Haitian economy and we need to create jobs, whether it's the people getting involved in removing the rubble or creating areas where benches can be produced for the schools to open. Whatever the small, we need to revamp the economy so that people can work.
What's happening? I mean, we've been told that there's aid that's gone down. There have been building projects begun.
There are lots of aids going to Haiti. The Chronicle of Philanthropy reported $778 million given to Haiti. I tell you, I went from Port-au-Prince all the way to the south of Camperin. I don't see it as flagrantly as it's been given. And maybe it's the lack of coordination, and maybe it's the lack of a plan. So each person is doing what they can. But we need a plan for a long term, and we need a crisis management that is to come. It's really late right now for it.
Some people seem to be getting jobs. There was an article in the Huffington Post about a large number of aid workers from the United States and the rest of the world who are going to Haiti on a regular basis. If you were, again, speaking to the Donors Conference, what would you suggest as, if they're going to be talking about strings on the aid, what strings do you think should be attached?
I think the primary string is accountability for the monies that is given. For 20 years, Haiti's been going down the drain. January 12 just highlight and exacerbated what has been a nightmare. And so the need for accountability, whether it's the NGO community or the government, it's clear that we need to know what is the outcome of the dollars that we spend in Haiti. That's the first one. The second, that we need to stop spending without a plan of development that shows us the outcome over time or where we need to go.
Marie Sincere, thank you so much. Marie Sincere is the chair of the board of directors of the Lambie Fund for Haiti. We'll put a link at our website, GRITtv.org. Thanks for being with us.